Welcome everyone to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to another video. And today, we're going to be kicking off our new slate of What If videos. And today we are starting with none other than a series that helped kick off the relaunching of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. As you know, when I rebranded this channel to be a what if / anime review kind of channel, I started with the story of what if Naruto was in Highschool DxD. Now, I do feel like personally Highschool DxD is one of the more better animes that I've come across in my lifetime. And I know that, there's the joke of it being about the plot and it being about the plot. But really, though, I can say the storytelling is actually pretty good. I mean, if it wasn't a harem anime, then I think that taking the story premise in and of itself would be rather interesting. So I felt combining it with Naruto would be a pretty cool experience. And it's been something that's made my channel famous ever since. But since then, we've done a lot of stories. We've even had to reboot a few of them, including What If Naruto Was in Highschool DxD, and it was for the best. At the time when I made the story, I was just trying to get my foot in the door when it came to being a what if YouTuber. So I'll admit that the first story, the first version of it at least, had a lot of holes, if you will. A lot of things that needed to be fixed up and changed, and I'm happy to say that I do like how the series has come since I've remade it. But I always wanted to come back to Highschool DxD, but I never wanted to force it, I never wanted to do the type of thing where people just make a whole bunch of a certain type of content just to make it. Like, I really do like Highschool DxD, but I didn't want to come out and start making a whole bunch of what if videos for it if I felt like it wouldn't be of good quality. Plus, I wasn't sure what story I wanted to tell, but now I do feel like this one is going to work for me. But before we get into it, there is one thing I do want to mention. Now, I know a lot of you guys might not like the whole thing of it being formulaic or like how it was in the original story. And in the normal circumstances, I would agree with you, but in this instance, I'm just going to have to keep it real with you. While a lot I have changed for the premise of this idea, what if Issei was the shield hero, a lot of it is gonna feel like the show itself. And again, I've tried my best to put my own spin on things, but in a situation like this, there's only but so much you can do. Issei, he's still going to be Issei, Rias is still going to be Rias. Just because the powers change and, some dynamics will change with it, it's not gonna be a big whole revamp of everyone. I'm not gonna try to make it so that Issei becomes something that he's not. The Issei that you knew in the original story, that's the Issei you're getting here. I'm just putting my own spin on things when it comes to his powers and abilities. So if you're going to ask, I'm just going to tell you now, he doesn't have the boosted gear in this story. I don't want to try to combine powers. I don't want to make OP characters. I want him to get to the point where he's OP, but I'm not going to make him OP right off the bat. So that is something to keep in mind also. So I just wanted to make you guys fully aware of where I'm going to try to take this story going forward. Also, I want you to stay tuned for everything else that we're going to be having on the channel coming out this week. We're going to be trying to run 6 stories a week all at once, usually being 1 per day, with one day having 2 uploads. Or if I can't do 2 uploads in one day, then I'll just move it over to Saturday. But we'll just be running through those 6 cycle of stories, and when they get to a close, then that's when I'll take my next break. But until then, let's get into this new chapter, a new year for PowerCore Productions, and I look forward to everything that I'm going to be bringing to you guys now and in the future. But without further ado, let's get into today's story. What if Issei was the shield hero? Season 1, Part 1. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. For Issei Hyodo, he always knew he was destined for great things. At least, what was great in his mind. Issei was a simple boy. He didn't really require much to be happy, although of the many few things that he enjoyed in life, his main pleasure were beautiful girls, voluptuous girls, girls of all shapes, curves, and sizes. Issei was, in no uncertain terms, a pervert, and he was proud of it. In fact, there was nothing that Issei wanted more than to become the harem king, to have his own escorts of beautiful girls of all types to adorn him. But there was only one small problem with that, just a tiny one, and that was that Issei was rather unpopular. Outside of his friends Motohama and Matsuda, no one really gave a crap about him. His parents, well, they loved him, but they thought he was a loser, and most girls, they didn't want to be with any of them. In fact, as they sat outside of the school, Academy, Issei would start to think to himself, why did he even waste his time coming here in the first place? Oh yeah, that's right. The school had become co-ed a couple of years ago before they arrived. The three young men thought that they would come to a school where they would be showered with beautiful girls of all curves and shapes from every which way, but they weren't given the slightest of mind. It was the spring semester of their second year, and nobody wanted them. They wondered, when were their dog days going to be over? When were they going to have the chance to truly shine? They would watch as a young man named Kiba Yuto would walk by the school courtyard, and all of the girls would be flanking him, although he seemed to keep them at bay. For Issei and the others, it felt as though life couldn't get any worse. At this point, they were going to be going into college with no girls, no experience, no nothing. Motohama and Matsuda wanted to go peeking on the girls' locker room, and Issei, he really wanted to tag along, but his teacher had been railing him about something that he needed to do, and if he didn't do it, it was going to be his ass. So unfortunately, he would have to bid them farewell as he would make his way to the library. Issei would be kicking himself in his own mind. It seemed as though his life, it was just caught in a rut, a dead-end struggle. He wished that just one girl would take interest in him. As he made his way to the library, he would walk across the courtyard for the Occult Research Club. As he did so, he would look up to the window and he would see her. She was a third-year student. Long, crimson flowing red hair, and eyes that seemed as though they could pierce a man's own soul. Her name was Rias Grimmery. Word was she was an exchange student from Northern Europe. She was the president of the club. But for Issei, it was her numbers that were off the charts. 36, 34, 36. The perfect combination. Everything that Issei would have ever wanted in a woman, that was Rias Grimmery. Or Big Red, as she was called. But, in the end of the day, what would a girl like her want with a guy like him? But unknown to Issei, he wasn't the only one who was interested. As Rias would turn, she would finish her game of chess with her friend and vice president of the club, Akano Himejima. She would ask about the young man, and Akano would fill her in that the young man's name was Issei Hyodo. Rias continued to show some interest in him, telling her vice president to keep a close eye on him in the meantime. Issei would eventually make it to the library. It seemed to be a ghost town, practically empty. Although that was to be expected in the afternoon, everyone had practically gone home. Issei returned his books like he was instructed to, and in the meantime he stopped to go see if anything of interest was in here. Of course, nothing really caught his eye. Nothing at all, but there was one book. It looked old and tattered, It was on the floor. It had no serial numbers, no barcodes, nothing at all. Issei wasn't sure of where this book had come from, or if it even belonged to the library in the first place. There was no mark for it, so it was obvious that the library didn't own it. Anyone could have it if they wanted to. Issei would take a look. The cover was rather simple. The Rising of the Shield Hero. For Issei, the book itself, it didn't feel interesting. There was nothing special about it, but he felt drawn to it for some reason, as if there was something compelling him to take it. Issei would take the book and he would go sit in the corner for a minute. He decided he would look through the first chapter. The chapter started with a young man named Nafumi Iwatani. The story was basically that there were these 4 cardinal heroes. One had a sword, one had a bow, one had a spear, and this guy, he had a shield. Apparently, there had been heroes who had come before them who bore these weapons. However, this story it told about the perspective of the shield hero. It told of his fall from grace, how he was falsely accused by the Princess Mine, how he was shamed and publicly humiliated. For Issei, he felt bad for this Nafumi guy. He felt like this guy was getting blue-balled every which way. He couldn't imagine being betrayed by a girl like that. Well, he wouldn't have to worry. It wasn't like he had a girlfriend anyway. But he was inclined to keep reading, so he would take the book and put it in his bag before leaving. The sun was starting to set, and he was walking across the bridge from his school, back onto the main street so he could head home. Although he stopped for a brief moment, he would lament that his love life was in the absolute crapper. Although, hey, at least I don't have anyone trying to use me or frame me, at least. That was the sentiment that he carried. Although, his fortune would quickly change. A young girl would approach him on the bridge. Issei didn't recognize her school uniform. She didn't seem to be from here. He had never seen her. The young girl was shy and pretty cute. She had long, dark black hair and rather glowing sapphire eyes. She would walk up to Issei and politely ask if he was seeing anyone. Of course, Issei wasn't. And the young girl would explain that she had watched him for some time and she thought he was pretty nice and she wanted him to be her boyfriend. For Issei, he felt like this had to be a dream. This couldn't be real. Girls didn't do this to him, but here it was happening. Issei was elated that this girl had actually taken the time to be with him. He was overjoyed and he agreed happily. The next day, he showed off his new girlfriend to his friends. Her name was Yuma Amano. She was perfect in every way. Cute smile, nice, beautiful hair, beautiful eyes, a body that could put anyone to shame. She was just an absolute godsend for Issei. Issei's friends quickly became jealous, and he felt extremely happy. He felt as though he were on cloud 9. His dog days were over. However, unknown to Issei, he was being watched from a distance. One evening, as Issei and Yuma were walking home, Yuma would ask Issei if he were free next Sunday, as she wanted to go on a date. Issei's luck couldn't have gotten any better. All of this was happening for him. He didn't have to overthink or do anything. She came up to him for a date. She was spontaneous, to say the least. For Issei, he felt as though his life was now starting to get on track. Everything he had ever dreamed, everything he had ever wanted, it was now all within his grasp. As he agreed to the date, Issei would look at his right hand. it was getting extremely hot for whatever reason, like a burning sensation that he couldn't quite shake off. He had dumped it in cold water a couple of days ago, and he had even tried using some ointment, but it really was starting to burn. Of course, this wasn't the hand that he normally did his business with, but still, it was his hand. And the fact that it seemed as though his hand had somehow caught something was more than what he could bargain for, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. In the meantime, he continued to read from the book. His hand and the warm sensation that he got from it was progressively getting worser. He wasn't sure of what to do about it, but this was a small nitpick to say the least. He had a girlfriend now, and he was going on a date. He didn't have anything to worry about. Nothing at all. At least, that's what he told himself. However, surprisingly enough, he continued to get enthralled with the book that he was reading. The book of the Shield Hero, learning of his many exploits and escapades, of the friends that he made along the way. The book was rather telling, and he felt himself being connected to the Shield Hero in a way that he couldn't quite describe. He could almost see himself in the shield. All the same, though, he would put that aside as, not too long after, the day would eventually come for his date. As the day had finally arrived, Issei felt as happy as he had ever been. This was his first real date, and he wanted it to go well. He really wanted to put his best forward with this. Despite his many shortcomings and his love for women, he wanted to be a good boyfriend to Yuma, and he wanted to make her really happy. As he was waiting, a young woman with a flyer would hand over and give it to Issei. The flyer saying that your wish will be granted. Issei wouldn't really think much of it, and he would just fold it and put it in his pocket. For him, his wish had come true already. There wasn't anything else that he really wanted in life. Yuma would soon arrive, in a lovely sundress, as beautiful as ever, and they would proceed to enjoy their date together. They would go out to the mall, do a little shopping. Issei would buy her a special bracelet, and they would enjoy a nice evening meal. Before long, they were walking together as the sun started to set, as they made their way through the park, heading to the water fountain. For Issei, this was truly the most perfect day that he had ever had. He couldn't think of anything else that would make it better. And Yuma, now holding his arm rather closely, would whisper in his ear that there was something that she wanted to ask him, before walking up to the fountain and standing in front of him. He thought this was the moment. He was going to get a kiss. This was going to be awesome. And then, just as quickly as everything seemed to have been going well, things quickly changed for the worse. There was a sudden chill in the air. Issei could feel it for some reason. It was as if the warm and happy feeling he had felt, that sense of comfort, had suddenly been stripped from him. As Yuma looked up to him, the expression on her face changed, one from a girl who was sincere and kind, to a malevolent being. He couldn't quite describe it, but it felt as though a veil had been dropped, as if Yuma had suddenly changed into someone entirely new. She looked at him with a devilish grin, and she asked him quite nicely, "Would you please hand over your sacred treasure?" Issei wasn't really sure what she was talking about. What treasure could she possibly mean? I mean, he didn't have anything or very much to his name. In fact, he could barely afford his date. But she would walk closer to him again, and she would ask politely but a bit more aggressive, "Would you please give me the holy shield?" Issei now wasn't sure of what she was talking about. What shield? He wasn't carrying a shield. But before he could even finish his thought, Yuma would start to change and transform, turning into something entirely different. Her clothes began to evaporate as a dark fluid would form around her, transforming her from a cute and innocent girl to something you see on the late night when you're trying to rub one out. Issei, for a moment, he was enamored. After all, her large kazangas were definitely ones to be admired, but at the same time, as dark feathers began to flow all around him, he felt as though he were not in the presence of his girlfriend, but rather he was in the presence of an actual demon. Issei would back away at her as she licked her lips, asking him one more time to hand over the holy shield. But Issei, he would beg, telling her that he didn't know anything about a shield. He didn't have it. He didn't have anything. Yuma would simply pout, telling him that it was too bad, and that if he had only done what she had asked, maybe he could have lived a little while longer. Or not. Issei would try to escape, but before he could move or do anything, he felt a sharp pain flow through him. He looked to see that he had been stabbed by something made out of light. It looked like a spear. Issei quickly fell to the ground as he started to cough up blood, as Yuma would quickly fly away. Issei could feel his life slowly starting to slip away from him. He could feel the warm blood starting to flow and move out of him as he was laying in a pool of it. An instant wave of fear and regret would start to wash over him all at once. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of weird, messed up dream. I mean, why was this happening to him? He thought he had been a good boyfriend. He thought he had done everything right. And yet she played him like that. Was all of this just a game? Was she just looking for something? How could you have been so foolish? Among his other wishes, he can only think of one other girl, Rias. In that moment, she was the only thing that he could think about. I mean, if he could have died, why couldn't he die motorboating those fun bags? But all the same, a guy like him probably didn't deserve something like that anyway. He had lived a shallow life, never really tried very much. Instead of focusing and improving on himself, he merely chased skirts all day long. He made a promise that if he got another do-over in life, that he was going to try really hard to be a better person. At the same time, though, there was a tinge of rage. He would think about the book. He would think about the story of the shield hero, of Princess Mine, and how she had used him, and how he felt as though he were in a similar boat. He remembered the rage that the hero felt, and now he was starting to feed into that rage. Of course, he was too weak to do anything about it. I mean, what was he going to do against a demon? But all the same, he hoped that somehow she would get hers. If he could just get out of this, he would want his vengeance. All the same, as his life force started to fade, the flyer in his pocket would fly into the air. As a red magical circle would appear, in Issei's waning vision and in his waning memory, he would see her flying above him. He could see Rias, As she looked down upon him, she would smile, telling him that he was not going to die here. She had come to save him, and from this moment forth, his life would be to live for her sake. And with that, Issei would pass out. The next day, Issei would awaken, although he couldn't tell what he had just gone through. He didn't do drugs, but he felt like he was on the most trippiest dream he had ever experienced. All the same though, if what had happened was real, he didn't want to be a part of it. He looked through his phone, but he couldn't find Yuma's phone number anywhere. All the pictures he had taken of them together, they weren't there either. He went to school with his friends Motohama and Matsuda, but they didn't know who Yuma was either. It was as if she never existed. Issei started to feel headaches, and his right hand became even worse. Motohama made a joke that he needed to lay off the porno, but Issei didn't even care at this point. He told him to shut up and that he was going to be taking an early day. Issei knew he might get in trouble for it, but really at this point, what did it matter? With that, he simply left school and just wandered around walking. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He wasn't sure of what he was going to find, but he knew he couldn't stay there. Had everything he had been through, was it really not real at all? Was it just a dream, a fantasy? All the same, it wouldn't take long as eventually the sun would start to set, and not too long after, he would find himself back in the same park that he had been in with Yuma before, when he died. It had to be real. There wasn't any other way. However, as Issei pondered with his own thoughts, he would be stopped by a man in a trench coat and a hat. The man would look to him and call him a stray, asking who he belonged to or where he had come from. Once again, Issei would see the dark wings, the ones that Yuma had. There was no mistaking it now. This was in fact real. And even worse, his life was in danger once again, and there wasn't much that he could do about it. Issei would try to jump away, but he jumped a lot farther and a lot faster than he normally thought he could. The one who had introduced himself, the fallen angel, Donasik, would call him a stray that needed to be put down. He would conjure a spear of light, preparing to stab Issei right through the chest. Issei held up his hands, desperately hoping to block it. In that moment, the only thing he focused on was protecting himself, through any means. Donasik threw the spear of light rather quickly, Issei holding up his hands desperately, hoping that he could be shielded and protected. In that moment, an explosion would occur. Issei would be knocked down, but he would get back to his feet, and he would feel that there was something on his arm. The burning sensation was starting to dissipate, but he couldn't help but wonder, had he lost his arm? Had his arm been lopped off? No. He looked on his arm and he saw that there was a shield. There was a shield protecting him, rather large in size. Issei stood and held up his arm, trying to wonder what had happened. How on earth had he gotten a shield of all things? Well, there was no time to wonder that. The only thing he knew was this shield was the only thing that saved his life. Donasik became annoyed, calling it an awakening of sorts. He would attempt to launch more light spears and attack at Issei. Issei using the shield, he would try to block them away and run as fast as he could. Surprisingly, he was a lot faster now than he was expecting. Of course, Issei had no real way of knowing how to fight. He had no real way of knowing how he had gotten where he had gotten to in the first place. All the same, though, as Issei tried to escape, Danasik would target his legs, throwing 2 light spears through them. They quickly stabbed him and he fell to the ground. The pain, it felt excruciating, as if he were burning on the inside. And Danasik would remark that light was an absolute repellent for devils, and that none of them could escape its power. Feeling it burn through his inner body, Danasik went in for the finishing strike, stabbing him through the back and in through his lower abdomen once again. Issei began to cough up even more blood. So much for a shield, he thought. But what good was this now? If he really was about to die, if he had been about to die the first time, at least he would have died from a cute girl killing him and not like this. However, before the fallen angel could continue on in his onslaught, he would be stopped at once, blasted by a torrent of crimson lightning. Issei would look up to see that Rias had arrived, along with Akeno, and he thought he could recognize Koneko there for a moment, but there wasn't much that he could do since he passed out not too long after. Rias would stand between Danasik and Issei, warning him not to attack anyone of her household. Danasik would apologize, being courteous to see that this devil was in the house of Grimmery. However, he would warn all the same that she should keep close ties to her strays. All the same, he would leave at the warning. The others turned to Issei. They weren't sure what to do for him, since if they didn't get him treatment soon, he really would die. And Rias would tell them not to worry, since she would take personal care of him herself. The next morning, Issei would awaken once again in bed, only to see that he was completely naked. He quickly looked at his body, and there were no stab wounds, nothing through his lower abdomen, nothing in his legs, but he felt something on his arm. He looked, and he saw that the shield was attached to him. This meant that what happened wasn't a dream. Issei would quickly try to take the shield off. He tried to move it. It would move all around his body, but taking it off, it just wasn't happening. He tried his best to pry it with anything he could find in his room, but it just wasn't going to pop off at all. And also, it wasn't very big. I mean, when he had made it the last time, it was big enough to cover his arm, but now it was merely covering the upper part of his palm. As he looked down, though, there was another issue in mind, as he saw that there was someone else laying in bed next to him. He unveiled the covers and, well, his jaw absolutely dropped as he tumbled out of the bed, to see a young girl stretching as she got up as well. But this was no ordinary girl. This was Rias. Rias Grimmery was in his bed. What was she doing here? And wait, why was she naked? Why was she here? Why was his shield here? There were many questions going through his mind, and he wasn't sure if he even wanted the answer. As Rias would stretch and make herself comfortable on the bed, as Issei was kneeling on the floor, having a bit of a panic attack, Rias would tell him to calm down, assuring him that everything would be fine. She would formally introduce herself. My name is Rias Grimmery, and I am a devil. I'm also your new master now. It's nice to meet you, Issei Hyodo. A cute name. I think I'll let you keep it. There were many questions circling through Issei's mind. Of course, he couldn't have them all answered at once, and things didn't get any better as he heard his mother coming up the stairs, telling him that he needed to get ready for school. Issei tried to cover everything up, but he did a poor job of it, only for the door to open up and his mother to see him in bed with a girl. She calmly shut the door before going back downstairs to tell his father what was happening, and they were trying to make sense of what was going on also. In the meantime, Issei would be in bed next to Rias, concerned about a lot of things. Although, not the important things you would be thinking of. Of course, anyone in this situation would be concerned about the fallen angels, other mystic beings, this magical shield that wouldn't come off of your body, but Issei was a man of culture. He was focused on the important things. Did they do it or what? I mean, did they? Was that a good thing or a bad thing? No, that's a great thing. But wait, I don't remember. Did I sleep through it? Oh my god, did I sleep through my first time? How much of a loser could I possibly be? Those thoughts went through Issei's mind, but Issei assured him that nothing happened, and that their virginities were still intact. Of course, Issei would smile being happy, but at the same time, he felt a bit ashamed that nothing happened. But Issei would be teased, Regis telling him that there was no need to have such a sad face, that she had taken quite a liking to him. She would also confirm that what had happened before wasn't a dream. Everything was in fact real. She was in fact the devil, and that shield he had was a magical ability, which was something that they would need to fix because he couldn't just walk around carrying a giant shield. But Issei wasn't sure what to do with it. It was strange. The shield was a lot like the one that he had read in the book. He asked if it were connected somehow, and Rias would explain that they would talk about it in due time, but they needed to get ready for school, and he needed to do something about that shield. Well, Issei remembered that the shield was a lot bigger if everything was correct the last time he used it, but the fact that it wasn't as big as it was before meant that it must have been able to grow and shrink somehow. After some heavy thinking, Issei then realized that if this shield worked the way he thought it worked, the way a certain male anatomy body part worked, something that could grow and shrink on the user's command, maybe. Issei then closed his eyes. He started doing some heavy thinking, although not about what you would be expecting. No. For this, he had to do the unthinkable. He had to think of all the things that didn't get him aroused. He wasn't proud of this method. No one would be. But it'd be a lie if it didn't get results. The more he thought about the unpleasant things, the smaller the shield grew, until eventually it shrunk down to the size of a watch, although there was no strap. Of course, Issei couldn't just walk around with this thing just being on his wrist, so he looked around in the room. He found a Velcro strap that he could slap on his wrist. Sliding the shield, it would be on top of it. It looked like a watch. He could probably pass it off as one, or a bracelet of some kind. A bracelet that just never came off. Rias was impressed and would congratulate him on being able to think of something so creative. And with that, they would walk to school together. Of course, at breakfast, they still had to smooth over things with his parents, and Issei got a chance to see firsthand that things were not what they seemed. It seemed as though Rias were able to charm his parents somehow into having an understanding mind about everything that was happening. And all the same, they seemed completely cool with it. He wondered if this was some form of hypnosis or something along those lines. But all the same, there were many more questions that needed to be answered. But they would have to wait. Everyone at school had now been given their undivided attention. Seeing a nobody like Issei walk around with a beauty like Rias, well, this left everyone with mixed emotions, as Rias would bid Issei farewell, telling him that she would send someone to pick him up. Issei wanted to stop and ask her more, but before he could, he received 2 punches to the back of the head as he went flying to the ground. He would turn to see that it was Motohama and Matsuda who had done it, both of them confronting Issei about whatever he was doing and how on earth he could have possibly landed Rias of all people. Of course, always being the one to want to play up a situation, Issei nonchalantly said that he was just rolling in some double Ds, which proceeded to get him even more of a thrashing. As Rias watched from afar, a girl named Sona would approach her, asking her why she was so interested in him, of all people. And Rias simply remarked that he had a gift. He was kind of cute, in a way. Amusing. For Issei, he sat through class, but he didn't pay attention. There were a lot of other things on his mind right now, and school just really wasn't one of them. At the end of the day, Kiba would appear in Issei's homeroom, coming to pick him up and take him to the occult research club. Issei was surprised that it was Kiba of all people who would be coming to pick him up, but didn't really complain about it. He would follow him to the club, where they would be greeted by a young girl sitting on a couch, enjoying a plate of chocolate. Issei would recognize her as Koneko Tojo, a first year, who many of the newer students were enthralled with. And not too long, they would be joined by Akano, who would introduce herself to Issei as well. Her rather beautiful looks caught Issei's attention also. And not too long after, Rias would step from the shower and she would introduce Issei to all of them. Once they sat, Rias would begin to explain the true purpose of the Occult Research Club, explaining that they were actually a group of devils, and that what Issei had run into was a fallen angel. While they were usually confused with one another, there was actually a difference. Fallen angels were actually angels who had fallen out of favor with God, while devils were a natural-born product, something different from angels and fallen angels altogether, and that in a way they were in a bit of a three-way fight, so to speak. All of this seemed to be a bit too much for Issei to understand. It made him feel a bit nervous. He wasn't sure if he wanted to stay to find out anything else, but when they revealed who Yuma was, this caught his attention. They revealed that she was actually a fallen angel named Rainier, and that what she had been after was that shield of his. Issei would explain that he wasn't sure where the shield had come from. All he had done was read a book about some guy called the Shield Hero. This was where Akano would come in to explain some things. She would explain that there were many books like the one Issei had found, detailing the stories and the lives of the various cardinal heroes who had existed throughout mankind's history. The 4 cardinal heroes each possessed a powerful weapon. You could say they were one of the other great Longinuses, or the sacred gears. Of course, these weapons were always reincarnated and born to a new person ever so often, along with the sacred gears. But they were very rare and they didn't pop up too often. That's why they were scattered throughout mankind's illustrious history. But anyone who obtained them were usually people who were famous or went on to do amazing things. Of course, throughout history, there were different beings who had become cardinal heroes. Humans, angels, fallen angels, devils, all the like. But the cardinal weapons had been destroyed in the last Great War. Learning more about it, the Great War that had been fought between the angels, the fallen angels, and the devils resulted in the death of the other heroes, unfortunately, along with their sacred gears. However, the shield had power that allowed it to surpass even the other three. However, the shield hero had mysteriously died and disappeared following the events of the last Great War. And the hero's whereabouts, well, he hadn't been seen since. Of course, it was assumed that he would eventually reincarnate. The shield itself would find a new host, but they never imagined that it would be someone so close by. This was truly a rare find for them. Issei was now even more perplexed. The idea that this guy that he had read about, Naofumi, was actually true, this guy was real, it actually made him feel bad, thinking about all the things he had gone through, but he did overcome them eventually. Issei would show them the book that he had, and Rias would confirm this was a text of Naofumi and his life. Of course, there were other people who had the shield, but their books and stories, well, they were hard to find. A lot of them lost, scattered through the sands of time. Although the fact that he had been able to find one, it was more than rare. This could be worth a fortune in the right hands. Of course, this also caught Issei's interest also. I mean, for all the bad luck, the potential to have power and to have something of great fortune, maybe he was on the right track. Along with that, Issei would also learn of what devils actually did, their purpose. Their purpose being to repopulate and form pacts and contracts for services. Of course, this wasn't like how they did things back in the day with the whole selling your soul thing. That was too much of a price to pay for something small. So they took other payments in various forms and fashions, and that Issei would be working alongside them. Issei would go handing out flyers to begin with, and that seemed to work in the meantime, but eventually he would get his chance to see what he could do. It all started when Koneko, who had been overbooked with clients, needed a little help, and Rias would give Issei the opportunity to go and form a pact of his own. Issei would give him the Grimmery House seal on his hand to show that he was a part of the House of Grimmery, and they would form the magic circle, allowing him to be transported to the client that summoned him. However, for Issei, things didn't really work out the way he wanted to. He wasn't really adept at using magical abilities yet, so making the jump wasn't really as easy as he was expecting. But Rias would reassure him that things would work out, and that if he did a good job, he could get servants of his own one day. Now this was something that Issei was looking forward to. The idea of getting his own servants. And Rias knew where he was going with this, and she happily confirmed all of his hopes and desires. Issei could build his own harem. He could really become the harem king. What was once thought to be a fantasy, well, now it could be a reality. This filled him with joy, even as he had to pedal on his bike all the way to his client's home. The idea of forming his own harem, that dream alone kept him going. Eventually he arrived, and the client wasn't too fond of him at first. What type of devil can't use a magic circle? It sounded lame. Of course, Issei would take a while to convince him of who he truly was, and the guy would let him come in, where Issei would learn of what he had summoned him for. Basically for role-playing, or essentially that's what he did with Koneko. The client would ask what Issei could do if he had any cool powers. Issei wasn't really sure, but he remembered he had the shield. He would hold up his hand. What the client thought was a simple watch would be amazed as the shield would grow in size. It looked like something completely magical, and It kind of looked like an anime he was watching. It was called Isekai Shieldo 1. That sounded a bit too familiar for Issei, but he remembered it as an older show about some guy that got sent to another world and had a shield. It sounded a bit like, but that couldn't really be right. That had to be a coincidence. And if it wasn't, somebody was owed some royalties. The client, however, was completely amazed by Issei and his shield's abilities, asking what he could do with it. Of course, Issei didn't really know since he was new to it himself, but the client had something in mind. Besides being a major otaku, he was also a card-carrying member of the NRA, so to speak, and he actually had a gun of his own. He wanted to try something out. He would ask Issei if he could shoot that shield to see how strong it was. For Issei, he wasn't sure if they should do something like this. It was really dangerous, but he decided, why not? And so they would try it out. The client would shoot Issei in cool and different poses, and Issei's shield was able to block the bullets every time. They both became very impressed, and they just kept trying out different things to hit the shield with. Eventually, they got a little too cocky, and the client shot a bullet, but instead of it just being deflected to the ground, it shot straight up and started to bounce around in the room. The stray bullet, Issei was afraid that it might end up hurting the client in the process, and it looked like it was going to do so, as Issei, with his heightened senses and abilities, could see that the bullet was getting ready to travel and hit his client straight in the heart. From across the room, Issei would rush towards him quickly as possible. With his arm outstretched, holding the shield, the only thing he could think of was protecting him, even if it meant it was from a distance. Issei would thrust out his arm, just hoping that his shield could make it in time. But then something else would happen. A green light would suddenly appear as a green shield would come in front of his client's chest, deflecting the bullet back into the ground. The two of them would sit with a sigh of relief, and Issei had no idea of how he had done that. Although, based off of what had happened, he recognized his shield. It was called the Airstrike Shield. He remembered it from the book. Of course, he didn't think that it was real, so he didn't pay much attention to it, but if the book was connected to him in such a way, then maybe that was what he needed to learn how to use his powers and abilities. Issei would tell them that they needed to call it quits for the night, and before leaving, the client would form a pact with him, giving him a payment, a way of saying thank you for saving him. It wasn't much, but for Issei, he thought that it could be useful. It was an extra copy of a set of rare manga that he had required. It was an extra set, so he didn't need it, but it was worth a nice small fortune, if you will. Issei wasn't sure of if he could take it as payment, so he would give Rias a quick call. She would tell him that they could accept that as a payment since it was something of value in this world, and Issei would accept it graciously. As he thanked him, he would make his way back home. He would think of where his life was heading now. He wasn't sure if everything that was happening was good or bad, but at the very least, he felt as though he were one step closer to his dream after all. Although as he made his way back home, he would feel a sudden shift, a presence. As he turned around, he would see a woman not too far behind them in the street. A woman dressed in a purple skirt. She would reveal herself to be Kara Warner, another one of the fallen angels. Appearing and cursing under her breath at Donna Seek for not finishing the job. She would create a spear of light, attempting to strike down Issei quickly as possible. However, Issei was ready for that trick. Quickly standing on guard, he brought out his shield, enlarging it into the point where it was big enough to block the spear of light. Standing at the ready, with the House of Grimmery's seal also being shown on his other hand, the woman became immensely afraid, calling it his awakening. He had somehow awakened his sacred gear, and he was from the House of Grimmery? Well, this was a fight she wasn't willing to take. And with that, she quickly fled into the night. Issei would quickly head back to the Occult Research Club, telling them of what had happened, as well as dropping off the payment. Rias would congratulate Issei on a job well done, and also on acquiring a new ability. It was said that the shield had a lot of different features to it, and that in time he would learn how to use them. But she would also warn him to be careful and cautious, to not fight alone, or to overestimate himself. Issei would take his warning to heart, and he would bid everyone a good night as he felt tired, and he wanted to go home and rest since he had had a long day. Agano would ask if Rias was being a bit too harsh and scaring him a bit, but Rias would be steadfast, telling that she only wanted to look out for him, and she didn't want anyone taking away her precious servant. As Issei went home, he would have a dream. It was rather blurry and he couldn't make out much, but he saw her. He saw Rainier, and seeing her, it filled him with immense anger. "You wish to kill her, don't you?" "Yeah, I want her dead." "Do not hold back. Feed into your rage. Give into the hatred." Issei would quickly wake up in a cold sweat. That voice, it sounded too familiar, but he could feel it welling up inside of him. There was a darkness. For all of the gifts that the shield provided, there was a hidden evil within it. Something akin to a curse. A plight that befell all who donned the shield. The next day, Issei, not having gotten much sleep after that dream, would be heading to school. However, as he did so, he would see a young girl trip on the side of the road. He got a good look at what was under that skirt too, but he figured instead of being an absolute jerk, he could go and do the right thing. So he quickly went and helped her back on her feet. He could see that she were rather beautiful, with long, flowing blonde hair and with soft and inviting emerald eyes. As he helped her, he would see a small cross around her neck. She would thank him as he introduced himself, and she did the same. She was new to town, and she actually needed some help because she was looking for the local church. Her name was Assia Argento. This concludes What If Issei Was the Shield Hero? Devil of the Shield, Season 1, Part 1. For all this and more, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for the rest of the week as we have more new stories coming to PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington, signing off, and I'll see you next time.